What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Journey to You. My name is Courtney, and as usual, I have to say a huge thank you for all of the support and the encouragement. It means the world to me, and it really is my motivation to continue embracing my voice and embracing myself, so thank you. As you can tell by the title, we're going to be discussing narcissistic abuse in this episode, and before we get into it, I want to give everyone an opportunity to click off. As I mentioned in the grief episode, I don't want these things to trigger anyone negatively. If you're not in the space to listen, I completely understand. I know that it's a heavy and a very personal topic for some people, so please do not watch if it's going to cause you more pain. Definitely come back when you're ready, whenever that might be. So I'm hoping that by going through the cycle of narcissistic abuse, people on the receiving end will gain some validation and people on the outside will have some more understanding and compassion to those in their lives who might be experiencing this. Now, I actually learned about the cycle of narcissistic abuse from my therapist and from some videos here on YouTube. However, for today's video, I'm going to be pulling from an article by a therapy group, and the direct link will be in the description box. I chose it because they pulled from a book called Emotional and Narcissistic Abuse by Jay Vanderway, one that I've read and one that I stand by, so I'm going to include the link to that book as well. Now, the first stage in the narcissistic abuse cycle is idealization, and this is where the narcissist will use tons of words of affirmation, love, and adoration to uplift their partner. And on the receiving end, of course, it feels good. The narcissist seems like the perfect partner. It seems like they're being very attentive, they care, and they're just open and willing to love you, which when you're pursuing someone for the sake of a romantic relationship, these are all things that you want and you think you need. What people on the receiving end often miss is that the narcissist is actually creating this safe haven to make them feel comfortable enough to open up and to share personal things about themselves that will likely be used against them later. The second stage in the cycle is devaluation, and this is where the narcissist will use all of those good things about you against you. So everything that was considered to be a positive trait is now considered a flaw. And this doesn't just happen overnight. There are very intricate parts to the cycle that make it tough to understand and in the end tough to leave. So in the devaluation stage, the narcissist will kind of flip-flop back and forth. They idealize you sometimes, they devalue you sometimes, so it gets a little bit confusing, and there's just enough of a balance so that you don't just completely shut down and leave the relationship. So it happens a little bit at a time, and eventually the amount of energy that goes into idealizing the partner becomes less, and more time is spent actually devaluing the partner. And at this stage, you feel like you have to prove yourself, like you have to prove that you are the good person that the narcissist saw in the beginning of the relationship. The next stage being discard. So at this point, you're extremely drained and you don't have the wherewithal to defend yourself anymore. The narcissist will look for narcissistic supply or attention outside of the relationship. And that can look like many things. Initiating connections with people outside of the relationship. It can look like having a hobby that they just become incessant about. Anything to remove themselves from the relationship. And by this stage in the relationship, it's very likely that you've already pulled back from friends and family because the narcissist has made you feel like you are just so unworthy of love and respect or care even. And this is the point in the relationship where you know you have to leave, but you just can't. You're already hooked sort of on this very unhealthy cycle, this roller coaster of very high highs and extremely low lows. And because you don't feel like you're worthy of any support that doesn't come from the narcissist, you stay. And that's where you head into the next stage, which is destroy. Now, the destroying stage is really just the devaluation stage times 2. At this point, you are extremely drained. The narcissist knows this, and this is where they begin to use a lot of your negative memories about the relationship against you. They hold them over your head and make you feel guilty. You might end up apologizing for things that, 1, didn't happen in the first place, or 2, things that you're not even responsible for. Now, in this article, the last stage is called hover, or other people might call it hoovering, but this is where you might have left the narcissist, or the narcissist might have abandoned you for some period of time, but you're not actually out of the cycle or out of the relationship 100% because they do things like sending nice text messages or sending gifts. And it reminds you sort of the dynamic you had in the beginning. So it's kind of creating this false hope, which makes it difficult to fully pull away. This stage is extremely important to understand because at this point, the person experiencing the abuse has virtually no self-esteem. And so these kind and nice gestures seem very hopeful. It seems like there's a chance at reconciling and that things might be normal again. It's often what keeps the abused in the cycle, and it keeps them returning to the relationship even when they know on a good day that this relationship and the person is not ideal for them. And this article also mentions a very important thing, which is that this cycle doesn't always happen in a linear way. So it's not always one step after the other. By the hoovering stage of the abuse cycle, self-esteem and self-worth are completely eroded, and you almost begin to romanticize the narcissist and the relationship itself because you have those good moments and those good qualities about them on a pedestal. And so when they show you little glimpses of that throughout the time together, you really like cling to those moments. You start to sort of minimize the abuse, which just leaves you vulnerable for even more of it. So if anyone is or has experienced this, it's important to be patient with yourself. It's not a very easy thing to get out of. You have these brief moments of clarity. When the person is used to jumping in and out of your life, it just creates more confusion. It's not a very eloquent way of describing narcissistic relationships, but honestly, the only words I have are mind. It is extremely exhausting. You are living sort of two completely different realities, one where you know better and one where you don't, where you're used to this kind of dynamic. So everyone, that's a more formal explanation of the narcissistic abuse cycle. On the other hand, if I was to explain it more quickly, I would say that narcissistic relationships work in the opposite way that a healthy one does. In a more healthy relationship, you start off more slowly and you take your time getting to know someone and you work toward fulfillment together. And in the narcissistic relationship, you start off very good, so you get a very good understanding of what things could be like. And then once things plummet, you're constantly working. I honestly... in my head, I think of Mario because you're constantly like jumping back up and down, trying to reach whatever the goal is or whatever you experienced in the beginning. And the truth is that that hope that you have to return to the good old days when things were good, when they respected you, is what keeps you in the cycle. It's what keeps the cycle alive. So narcissistic abuse, as I'm sure you can tell, is a very layered thing. And having experienced it at such a young age was very difficult. And it's something that I carried a lot of shame about for a long time. I think I still do sometimes because I know that generally people don't understand unless you've been through it yourself. And I think that's another reason why I felt so stuck, because I grappled a lot with what my life should have been like. And being an anxious person, like you guys know, I'm an avid planner, I'm a researcher. Sometimes people say like young people think they know everything. It wasn't really so much that, but it's just that I had conversations with my parents. They told me what things to look out for in a partner that would not be ideal. So I carried a lot of shame because I felt like I was supposed to know better. My understanding of abuse at the time was that it was loud, violent, and aggressive. What I know now is that I was dealing with a covert narcissist, and these behaviors include a lot of gaslighting, manipulation tactics, belittling me, embarrassing me verbally, emotionally, using the silent treatment a lot. As sad as it is, it's like I just didn't know better at that time. Now that I know better, I'm able to do better. But at the time, I just didn't have that understanding or the visibility. And that goes hand in hand with some other things that I've spoken about, neglecting myself and my own feelings. So it got to a point where I was even gaslighting myself and telling myself that what I was feeling and experiencing wasn't actually there, or that it was justified. And so to anybody that is experiencing this currently or has experienced it in the past, there are a couple of things that I want to share with you. Number one, I need you to practice self-forgiveness. It's hard, to just accept that abuse is going to be part of your story, and I get it. But the bottom line is that self-forgiveness will help to set us free of these very deep and complicated emotions. And number two is that generally people are not going to understand. These breakups are nothing like healthy and amicable breakups, and so they just shouldn't be compared. And unless you've been through it, again, it's very hard for people to empathize because it's such a layered thing. And so I would encourage you to reach out to people who might have similar experiences. I didn't open up to anybody about this for a long time, but I did my research and that helped a lot. So you kind of have to bet on yourself. And I know that it can be difficult when you don't have the validation or the understanding from your inner circle. It feels lonely, it feels isolating. My third point would be to work on your self-worth. I realized that the more my self-worth improved, the less tolerant I was of abusive behavior. It kind of just ricochets off of you. Like once you have your self-worth intact, it's like you would never put up with those sort of things again. And to people who might be supporting someone who is in an abusive relationship or is just coming out of one, my only suggestion is to not ask why they stayed or how they ended up in their situation. I know that most times when this question is asked, people don't mean it in a bad way. However, it absolves the abuser of their responsibility, and it also makes the victim feel like somehow they should have known better. I think society altogether needs to put the onus back on the abuser. I don't really know how the abused always end up having to answer the burning questions. Lastly are some positive points. I know this was a very heavy episode, so we'll close with some of the things that my abusive relationship taught me. The first thing I learned is to accept people for who they are, not who I want them to be. Naturally, humans change and they evolve. And so at this point in my life, I know that if people change and if I change and it happens that we are no longer compatible, it's okay for me to separate from them and to acknowledge exactly who they are in that moment. As I mentioned earlier, I think my very high tolerance for dysfunction and the romanticizing kept me in the loop for a long time. Next, I learned all about my self-worth and self-love. I think this one should actually be number one. While I don't condone abuse by any means, I don't know that I would have been as intentional about my self-worth journey had it not been for this very unfortunate chapter in my life. And number three, I learned the art of detachment. I learned that in order to fully see and hear myself, I have to detach. I can't get caught up in my hopes and my dreams. I'm a very idealistic person, you guys, which again worked against me in the context of this relationship because it's really about how this relationship made me feel about myself. But my vision was so cloudy. And so now that I'm out of it, I can practice detachment in a healthy way, have some sort of boundary, some sort of separation between my own feelings and the feelings of other people. And I know that my worth is not dependent on the opinions of other people. So to close, everyone, I want to emphasize that you do not have to wait for a label. Our minds are wired for survival, meaning that if we're in an unhealthy environment, the first thing our mind is going to do is figure out how we can survive it. And that doesn't always look like leaving. It looks like making things work. It looks like finding a happy medium, some kind of compromise, even when it hurts us emotionally. In my case, I waited to have some very deep and all-encompassing understanding of the cycle that I was experiencing. However, plainly put, if you are not happy in your relationship, if you are hurting, that's enough reason to leave. Choose you every time. So that is it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.